aspects of resistance are now, I mean, it sounds a bit idealistic to say it, but it's sort of embedded within parts of society which wasn't the case in the past. You were either for or against. Under Thatcher, you were definitely, there wasn't much middle ground, you know.
No.
So that's not, I mean, life is much, much more complicated than that now. And things, some things that might impact the past been identified as resistance or militancy, some of those things are now a bit more embedded in people's kind of ways of doing things, I think.
Absolutely.
So.
It feels murkier.
In some ways it's not as, you know, it's not as, what's the word? Well, it's not as easy to read, I suppose. It's obviously nowhere near as easy to read, because it was like Scarborough versus Thatcher, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, that was a kind of...
But like you were saying, where's the sort of the left, you know, ideals, where, you know, where something we can really listen to and sort of have a go at getting behind. I
think it's sort of a good thing that the left's sort of withered away.
Right.
Because I think that, you know, the old-fashioned idea of the sort of Marxist conception of change probably, I mean, was useful partially, but I think in the end it's not really going to.
Yeah.
It's that sort of notion. It's easy notions of transformation, really. You know, mass movements and things. And the working class as the group of people who are going to change everything. It's not, you know, it's just not happening in industrialised countries. So it's not really in a lot of ways it's been a distraction, I think. I mean, I know, having said that, it's sort of very important on all levels, but I think there's been the way in which the British left, led by a sort of middle class, have, you know, assumed or romanticised the working classes. It's just incredible. You know, I used to go to meetings in London, and there'd be these Trotskyists kind of, you know, talking from probably been to Cambridge and stuff. They didn't know about any relation. Their characterisation of the working class didn't bear any relationship to the one that I knew. So I think there's a kind of, I don't know,
sure,
a bit of a sweep in there, because I actually don't think Marxism is like without any use at all.
Yeah,
but I do think that it's limited. It's kind of
it's a set of ideas that were appropriate to a particular time and a particular place. The world is very, very different.
Absolutely. That's probably the most important thing in a way. So I think it did inform a lot of resistance. You know, rather than.
Do you hear other new voices, challenging voices, expressing ideas that you think are interesting as
I suppose when I was at Coventry University, there's a guy there called Professor Gary Hall. Well, he's called Gary Hall, actually, he's not called Professor.
Professor Green.
In fact, I call him Gary.
Gaz.
Gaz. Anyway, Gaz. He sort of turned around in lots of ways in my thinking. So I think he's sort of, you know, he's drawing on, like, you know, this ridiculous phrase postmodernism. He's drawing on thinkers like, well, he individually is drawing on Derrida for sort of ways of thinking about things. But there's a lot of people using that, you know, continental philosophy as a way of thinking about social change. So, you know, like Deleuze and Foucault and all those people. And then I guess you are probably, aren't you, Alex?
Well, it's interesting because I did a lot of reading of those writers in my masters, which was all about which was much more about the 60s, I guess, and the kind of the rise of the counterculture, particularly with artists and activism and that kind of thing. And now I'm looking at like things 10 years on for me, and I thought I would go back to those writers and they would be my touchstone. But actually, for what I'm thinking about now, it just didn't somehow work, and that's when I kind of then went on to think about how theorists are writing about democracy, and that's when it started to kind of make more sense, because those people who are writing about ideas about democracy are not only writing about a kind of social theory, but they're also writing a little bit more about the mechanisms of that, mechanisms of kind of social control, often couched in democratic theory or in this idea of democracy, which is idealised or just banded out to represent something, whereas actually underneath all of these other things happening. There's an American author called Jodie Dean who's written about how democracy is a neoliberal fantasy. So it's not actually. So you've got to actually question. You've got to kind of not just think, oh, it's democratic, so it's all okay.
Yeah,
You've got to think, how is this democracy being controlled and who's controlling it? And,
that's exactly what when we were talking just before, and you were talking about Cameron and his ideas about happiness, and I was thinking the reason that we all swallow this in our society is because we go, oh well, it's a democracy, you see, so we voted them in, given them the legislation to make these decisions on our behalf, and so we're a democracy, so we better sit back and just swallow it because we're a democracy. And it's like, what the fuck? Sorry.
But that has a bit, does have some legitimacy, doesn't it? Because if you look at Burma, or you look at these places where there's nothing like democracy, I mean, clearly we live in a better state. So it's got, while on the one hand you think, fuck, it's just bollocks. It's very, 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 very partial democracy. But I suppose I see it as, it's not something to be swept away, if you like. It's something to kind of build on it. But what does it mean? Because it's so partial. I mean, it's so ridiculously small. I mean, none of us. Well, I don't know anybody in Britain who thinks, apart from people who are promoting the idea of politicians, that we actually really do live in a democracy. It's not democratic, it's just tiny. But I think for me, some of those thinkers, that they open things up, because with Marxism, which is I suppose how I grew up, not completely, but quite a lot. And it's like some of those writers, they were sort of like willing to take risks and things like that, and sort of, and to take a step back and not be involved in the struggle, take a step back and think about kind of the bigger picture. And like with Derrida, like what language, all about the nature of language and the kind of way in which language is not at all a straightforward thing. So I find that sort of fascinating. There's a lot of work to be done, apparently.
Yeah, cheers.
Go out and do that work.
The thing is that we didn't vote them in, did we?
No.
That's true.
That's what's hard to swallow.
Yeah.
The worst in a way, isn't it?
The Lib Dems just made it very, very tragic.